Today, I'm going to talk to you about some things that actually is going to play off of Jordy's message from last week and Steve's message from Sunday. And I can talk about this stuff with authority and confidence because I've walked the walk. And therefore, I know what I'm talking about. Jordy said something last week that, his whole sermon last week changed my life. But he said something last week, and he said, we're on a journey with Jesus. With Jesus. And then he also went on to talk about how, as Christians, what are we doing? Are we actually just using Jesus as a inner peace, make my life all good? I want the good life and, that Christianity thing, and that's what I'm going to walk out, and it's going to be sunshine, roses, and lollipops, and that's what Jesus is going to do for me. And that's what he's going to do for me, instead of actually being on his page and getting in his story and actually going on his journey. So that for me was like, I've done that my whole life. I've used Jesus just as a inner peace, make my life great. And he does. And then Steve went on Sunday to talk about how you want to find the people who have walked through the fire and have stood strong and come out the other side, because they're the ones that are going to lead you further up and further in. And you're going to want to make sure that those people are in your life so that when we actually are in the fire ourselves, we can be the people that go further up and farther in and not wither away and die. So those two things are what we kind of want to jump off of as a platform and just go deeper in today. So is the reason that you're a Christian because you just want a good life? Is that the reason that you're a Christian? And you really need to evaluate your heart and not just say, oh no. Just ask him, is that the reason, Jesus, that I'm a Christian? Because I want a good life? The thing is that if that is a true statement in your life, then you've got the wrong focus. Because walking out Jesus' story produces a good life. So when you walk out Jesus' story, it does end up producing an incredible life for you. It's incredible. I can stand up here and say, my life really is the best it's ever been. I have incredible things in my life. I am blessed beyond measure. I have things that I don't deserve. And he loves me, and he's in the midst of it all. And I have a foundation that is strong and firm. Because I'm allowing my life to be walking out Jesus' story, instead of allowing my life to be good because I'm a Christian and Jesus is in it. It's not about me. What's selfish thinking? It's not about me. It's about him. And it's about walking out his story and his adventure. And what does that look like? His journey. Well, let's just take a look at Jesus' life, shall we? Shall we? So Jesus, if we're walking out his story, let's look at his life. So Jesus was born into a small town. Mary had to be chased around, moving from town to town so she wasn't killed because she was carrying the Messiah. So that was kind of like his knitting together in the womb thing. And then Joseph had his own story of now he has a pregnant wife in a small town, and they're not married yet. So back then, that's no bueno. That's not okay. So he was born into that. And then he's God. I can't even imagine Mary mothering Jesus. Okay. I have a 1-year-old, Benton. I can't imagine what Jesus was like at 1. I kind of want to know. I kind of want to know if she had to tell him, no, don't touch that 1,001 times, and him look at you and go, ha, 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 ha. Right? Or turn around and he says, no, no, no. And that's the only thing that comes out of his mouth when he talks to you. And you're like, that's the only thing he hears from me is no. Like, I want to know what it was like. It wasn't probably easy, but Jesus has this story, and he grows up, and he's a son of a carpenter, and then when he waits till he's 33 to start doing his ministry. I mean, at one point, Mary and Joseph lost him when he was about 12. Oops. Like, come on, how do you lose a kid? And not just like lose him, like he was way back in the other town where they left and they were on their way home. Like, it's like getting in the car and like going home and realizing as you pull in, I'm missing one. Where's Jesus? Then having to go back and find him, right? But he started his ministry at 33, and he has all of these cool stories. I mean, he has these cool things that happen to him because he's Jesus, he's God, he's the Messiah. He's got some stuff. People flock to him, right? The disciples, he calls the disciples. Can you imagine? You're like sitting at your computer doing whatever you do, and some guy walks in and goes, hey, you, come follow me, and just walks out the door. Would you? I don't know if I would. I don't know. I hope that there would be something in me that would stir that this is the man that I'm supposed to follow. I hope that would happen. But like literally, he just went, hey, out the boat, come on, follow me. And he just kept walking, and then they just left everything they had and followed him to be a part of his story. So he does some really cool stuff. I mean, changes people's lives. And then he gets to the cross. And he gets to the whole persecution. I mean, like, that's a story right there. He's beaten, spit on, mocked, abused. Crown of thorns beaten into his head. Mockingly put clothes on and called the king and then spit on. And then he is sentenced to death on a cross. And he's got to carry his own cross. Graciously, because, the guy is beaten to a pulp. Graciously, somebody is then seen and called in and said, hey, help him carry his cross. And then he was nailed to it. And then he died. So what makes us think that we aren't going to have a cross that we need to carry? What makes us think that our life and our Christianity isn't going to have something that you're going to need to bear? What makes us think that we're not going to have a crown of thorns drilled into our head or lashed or mocked or spit on? Because if it happened to Jesus and we're a part of his story, guess what, folks? We're going to have to walk through it. Good news. He rose from the dead 3 days, brought us life. He did it for us so that when we are walking through his story in the midst of the fire that we find ourselves in, the grief, the pain, the loss, the craziness, the questions, he is faithful. That he is standing strong and he is there. He's in our midst. He's holding our hand. And actually, he can relate. He can relate to walking through the fire. But he can also relate to coming out this other side with life and life abundantly. So then we look at, so that's Jesus' story, and if we're part of Jesus' story, then I'm going to list off some people that were also a part of Jesus' story and some of the things that happened to them. Because realistically, it's not just Jesus who went through this. Then you look at all of his disciples. Andrew died on an X-shaped cross. Bartholomew or Nathaniel was filleted alive with knives. James the elder, brother of the Apostle John, was one of the first to be martyred for Jesus. James the lesser was martyred for Jesus. and sawed into pieces, it says. That's what history, sawed. So yeah, sawed into pieces. Sawed into pieces, people. For Jesus, P.S. Jude was killed with arrows. Matthew was martyred. Peter was crucified on an upside-down cross. Philip was hung. Simon was martyred. Thomas was speared and died for Jesus. And then some of his friends. So then we think of Job, lost his house, his riches, his cattle, his kids. Yet he still, praise the Lord, for his goodness. And then you look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who actually stood in the fire and didn't burn alive, were thrown in a furnace, and then came out the other side alive. But they were thrown in a furnace, people, because of who they believed in, who they didn't want to denounce. Paul was shipwrecked, stoned, and then lived, and then died by a sword. Stephen was stoned to death. Mark was dragged to death. Luke was hung. And then we have Joseph, who was put in a pit by his brothers, beaten, and left for dead because he was the chosen one in that family. Jonah was swallowed by a whale. Noah was criticized for his crazy thinking and what God told him. I mean, the list goes on. So those are just that's a pretty long list, but those are just a few of the crazy things that happen in the Bible throughout the entire history, Old Testament and New, of Jesus's and the Lord's followers and what they had to walk through. So then we here in North America in this 21st century decide that we're pretty comfortable and that this Christian life is just all happy, sunshine, and roses, is going to turn what hell I used to live into this, I will never have to go through anything again, fairy tale. That's not the truth. We get to live a fairy tale, but it comes at a price and a cost. And I don't think we in today's world understand that, because we automatically jump to, why God? Why have you done this to me? Instead of, I don't understand it, but you are good, and you are faithful, and you are with me, and you intercede for me. So, in my life, I've had some storms. And I might cry, by the way. So if that makes you uncomfortable, I'll pray for you and your mother issues. Because it's going to happen. And that's okay. But in my life, I've watched my best friend for the last 2 years walk through craziness in her life. I've known Nicole Orsillo Wallace for 18 years. And when we were 20 years old, the things we dreamed about didn't actually necessarily look like it is today. Because we had dreams, and they were wonderful. And they were in the shape of Briella Wallace and Abelyn Wallace and Emberly Wallace. And we dreamed about our kids. And we dreamed about our husbands, Louie Wallace. And Nicole had this dream in her life, and we would talk about it and pray about it. And it was wonderful. And it didn't look like a 6-year-old having cancer and fighting for her life for the last 2 years. That wasn't part of the fairy tale life that we dreamed for ourselves. It wasn't what we talked about when we were young. And yet here she is. She's 37 years old with an incredible husband, and they have to walk through this crazy life living out Jesus' story. And sometimes Jesus' story includes a little 6-year-old fighting for her life and against leukemia. But it's still Jesus' story. And I think they're doing a really good job of making sure that whatever they're in and facing today is Jesus' story. They've asked themselves, how can I take what I'm going through today and actually have it matter for him? And they're doing so good. And I'm so proud of them. We prayed for our husbands. I prayed for my husband for 20 years. I was 13 when I started praying for him. I met him and I married him when I was 33. And he is a dream come true, better than I could have ever have thought or imagined or wondered, or is awesome. He's dreamy. And I dreamed about our kids. I wanted a big family. And we had our son, who is wonderful. And he's my dream come true. And then recently, we were super excited because we got pregnant again. And then just a few short weeks later, that baby went to be with Jesus. And we miscarried. And then to our surprise and great delight, we got pregnant again. And we spoke life into this baby, and it was our dream. It was what we dreamed about. It was what I've dreamt about my whole life. Babies. I'm going to have babies. And we went for our first appointment. And the words that nobody ever wants to hear, there's no heartbeat, at 9.5 weeks, was uttered. And we lost our second baby. And that just happened a couple weeks ago. And I know that God is good, and he is faithful, and he is true, and he is loving and kind. And I know that my life and my story is walking out Jesus' story. Even if it looks like being 37, a mother of 3, and only having one at the dinner table. My life is good, and my life is blessed. And I have been given 3 gifts. One of them I get to hug and cuddle and love every single day, physically here on earth. And the other ones get to be raised and loved by the perfect God, the perfect Father. How good is that? That's good. And so, even in the middle of walking out 2 back-to-back miscarriages, I don't want them to just be a scar that I wear and carry around with me. I want it to be something that is Jesus' story. I want it to be something that he can use for his glory, not mine, his. I don't understand why. I don't blame him. But I've walked through the fire. We've walked through the fire. And it's not going to be the last. Because I've read Jesus' story. And I've read all the people that followed him and their stories. So my goal is to be a Christian, to be like him. So therefore, I need to walk this life out looking like him, even in the midst of the storms, even when I don't understand. So how do you do that? Because that sounds like a good, nice, sunshine and roses. Woohoo, that's good, Lise. But how do you do that? How do you practically do that? Like, what is it that you have to do to make sure that you're not the one that falls away when these storms come? Because they will come. So what do you do to make sure that you're standing firm on the rock? To make sure that you're not a reed swayed in the wind? To make sure that when the waves come, that you're not going to be tossed? You're not going to find yourself in sand, that you've built this house in false thinking. You got to do some stuff. You actually have to then switch your thinking, because if you think that the only reason you're a Christian is because it's going to make your life good, you need to switch it. And you need to be a Christian because you love Jesus and because you're part of his story and his journey. And what does that look like? And how does that involve me? And how do I walk that out? So the disciples, they found themselves in a storm once. And we're going to put the scripture up. It's Matthew 8:23-27. And we're going to read this little event. This is, then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him up, saying, "Lord, save us. We're going to drown." He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. So he's in a boat. Jesus is in a boat, and he's with his disciples. Did you know that there is a handful of disciples in there that were fishermen? I mean, they grew up their entire life on the water. On the water. They have not, this isn't their first storm. This isn't the first gale force winds that they've encountered. It's not the first time that I'm sure they've been in the midst of a storm on the water. And yet, they're a little perturbed. "Lord, save us. We're going to drown." They were really concerned with why he was sleeping and why he wasn't so concerned with their storm. He didn't wake them up and said, "Lord, there's a storm and it's going to drown us." They said, "Lord, wake up. We're going to drown." He was really concerned about Jesus sleeping in the boat. But I want to actually learn from Jesus. And I actually want to take that story and I want to learn how to sleep in a boat with a storm. But what I also want to learn is how to have a peace that passes all understanding, because that's what you need to sleep. You're peaceful when you sleep. And I want to find that, because that's the key to being able to survive the storms that we're in. And to know that Jesus is in the boat with you, and he is concerned about the storm, but he's not concerned about the aspects of the physical storm. He's concerned about you in the midst of the storm. He really is. John 16:3 says, "I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." So this is what I want. I want to have peace. He said it. I want to have peace. Because in this world, you will have trouble. Guaranteed. He just gave you a guarantee right there. But take heart. I have overcome the world. I am sleeping. But take heart. I'm in the boat with you. You're going to find trials. Find my peace. And then take heart. Because I have overcome the world. The thing we need to stay away from and steer away from is, in the midst of a storm, the natural instinct for us is to become a victim. It's natural. It's the first thing that we as humans in our fleshly nature do. It's natural. I'm very comfortable being a victim. I've been a victim most of my life. So for me, it's very easy to go into victim. Why me? Poor me. Don't you know what I've gone through? Don't you know what I'm going through? But I've chosen not to be that. So therefore, I have to choose that no matter what hits me or what comes my way, good or bad, I'm not a victim. Because I've chosen not to be a victim anymore, right? So we need to steer away from the fact that it's a poor, pitiful me, poor me, poor me, poor me. But you don't know what I've been through. I might not. But Jesus does. Jesus knows. And it's really important to make sure that you're dealing with the things in our life that have created us to be victims, so that you don't get to stay there your whole life. Because you don't have to. And a lot of us have gone through craziness. And a lot of us have walked in lives that I couldn't even comprehend or understand. But we want to find peace in the midst of the storm, in the midst of the trials, because they will come. It's a promise. But we want to make sure that we're standing firm on a solid rock foundation. You want to make sure that you're reading the words of Jesus. You want to make sure that you're spending time with him, that you're becoming his friend, that you're finding out who he is and who you are, that you're going further up and farther in, that your love looks like something. These are all great slogans and sayings that you can take away and say, oh, that's good, yep. Or you can actually apply them to your life, because then your story will then line up with walking out Jesus' story and Jesus' life and Jesus' journey. And how does that fit for you? What does that look like in your life? Now, Holy Spirit, come. Matthew 7:24 through 27 says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on a rock. The rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. I want to make sure that when he says, I have told you these things so that you may have peace, because I will have trouble, I want to make sure that I actually listen to those words so that they're a part of the firm foundation that I'm standing on. When he says he is with me, I want to make sure that those words are the foundation that I'm standing on. When he shows me how to live life, I want to make sure that his words are the firm foundation that I've built my house on. Because it says the winds will blow, the rains will come down, the streams will rise. So let's make sure that it's firm, And that's practically a few things that you can do to make sure that when they do show up, when the life that you didn't think or dream about becomes a reality, that you are able to stand firm on a solid foundation, that you're able to raise your hands in worship, not even understanding and not having to understand, but just knowing that he is good. And making sure that the stories of the stories in our life are of Jesus' story, and that they coincide and that they come. It's almost like, before you get saved, you're walking your own journey, and then when you get saved, it's like you actually then walk his. You stop walking yours. Yours got you nowhere. And his is going to get you somewhere. And it's going to be the thing that is going to get you to the end, the prize. My goal is to finish the race, to go after him, to be entered into heaven and to be said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." I have 2 babies that have made it before me, but someday I will see them, and someday I will be with them. And it might not look like how I think, and that's okay. But my goal is to get there. So then I can have peace in the midst of the storm. And that takes the sting out of it. Not completely. I am in the midst of grief. I am in the midst of sadness, a mother's heartbreak. And I'm okay with that. Because it doesn't change the fact that he is good. And that he is here. That he is faithful. That he is who he says he is. That it's going to be exactly the way he says it's going to be. We sang in worship song. At the end it said, "I love you and I'll never stop. I can't live without you, and all this is for you, Jesus." So let's make sure that those aren't just words we sing and they sound good. Derek had it right. All this is for you, even the brokenness, even the heartache, even the grief, even the loss, even the fires, even death, even battling cancer. Is that still all for him too? Are we walking that still for him? Still loving him? This is all for you, Jesus. Is it still all for him? My answer today is yes. It's still for him. Even in the midst, I want my hurts, fires, trials and tribulations, storms to bring him glory. To be the thing that I can stand on the mountaintop and proclaim from the top of my lungs that he is good, that he is faithful, and that I have weathered the storms, and he has calmed them in my life, and that in that my faith has grown, and my love for him has grown, and who I am as a person is changed and will continue to change because he is good and he is faithful. There's a pattern here of he is good and he is faithful no matter what. And I think these disciples got it. That was their whole life, was to live for him, to proclaim his story, to shout it from the mountaintops, to spread it all over the world. They got it. I want to be talked about in heaven, okay? That's what I want. I want Peter and Paul and all of these guys to come to me and say, "Hey, I want to sit down with you. I want to find out some things." Because I have some questions for them. I want to find some stuff out. Some things they left out in their writings, I want to find out. I have some questions. But I want to be somebody in my life and in my faith and in my walk that they are going to rush to when I enter heaven one day. They're going to be like, I want to sit down with you. And I think that our North American culture really does a poor job of preparing us for that. We live in great luxury and comfort. Those aren't bad things. But when they take away from the focus of Him and the story that He wants to live out through us, then it's not a good thing. It's of the world then, and not of Him.